My name is Margot Ellis and I turned 58 just 2 months before Christmas, 2023. I'd spent over 3 decades raising the children of the man I thought I loved, Dean, Rachel, and Jason, my 3 perfect kids, or so I believed. On Christmas night, our long, wooden table gleamed under antique chandeliers, 12-oot tree sparkling, prime rib resting in the center. Everything was picture perfect, the kind of holiday scene you see in glossy magazines and heartfelt movies. Dean, my eldest, took the seat where his father once sat, like he owned the legacy by default. Rachel sat to his right, elegance with an edge. Jason lounged on the opposite end, his third wife by his side, fingers texting even through dinner. My grandchildren played nearby, their laughter mixing with the sound of cutlery and conversation. I had prepared the meal with the same devotion I'd shown for 30 years, the same recipes, the same care. But this year, something in the air was different, tighter, colder, calculated. Halfway through dessert, Dean cleared his throat and stood up. He had that same courtroom voice he learned in law school, the kind that demands attention, whether you want to give it or not. I'd like to make an announcement, he said. Everyone felt quiet. We've talked, he continued, looking around the table like a boardroom executive, and we've decided that you, Mom, are no longer a part of this family. No warning, no emotion, just that as if 30 years of birthdays, homework, late-night ER visits, and unconditional love could be dissolved. With one sentence, everyone braced for tears. But I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I reached into my vintage clutch, pulled out 3 gold envelopes sealed in wax and said, "In that case, here's my parting gift to each of you." They had no idea those envelopes would destroy everything they thought they knew and that I had spent the last year preparing for this exact moment, to understand how I ended up handing out gold envelopes like weapons. At Christmas, you need to know what came before, the kind of love that blinds you, the kind of trust that cages you. I met Robert Ellis when I was 23. He was 15 years older, sharp as a razor, and dressed like the world owed him something, a partner at a prominent law firm in Chicago. He spoke with authority, confidence, and charm, the kind of man who made women sit straighter just by walking into a room. To him, I was a breath of fresh air, young, idealistic, devoted, a school teacher from Toledo who still believed in handwritten letters and home-cooked meals. 6 months in, he proposed. I moved into his Georgian-style house in Providence, leaving behind my family and small town life. He promised a future full of purpose, travel, and family, except we couldn't have children. Or, rather, I couldn't. He never blamed me outright, but the silence between doctor visits was thick with shame. Then one evening over wine and jazz, Robert said, something that would change the course of my life. There's a woman, a teenager. She's pregnant and scared. No names, no paperwork, but we can help her and bring the baby home. That was how Dean came to us, then Rachel, then Jason, all within 6 years. He told me the same story. Each time young girls in trouble, no strings attached. He handled everything through private channels, insisting we didn't need to go through adoption, agencies, or courts. Said it was cleaner this way, safer, that we were helping, that it was love, and I believed him. I was too busy being a mother to ask questions. I gave them everything, my time, my youth, my energy, my future. I packed school lunches, taught them to ride bikes, stayed up through fevers, and clapped the loudest at every recital, every graduation. They were my world. Robert was always more distant, present in body, but rarely in spirit. He paid the bills, bought the cars, and appeared in every holiday photo, but he was never the one. The kids called at 3 a.m. I was the one who showed up, and then one spring morning, 5 years after Robert died, I was cleaning out the attic and found a sealed leather folder tucked behind a box of Christmas ornaments. Inside, birth certificates, real ones, and letters from a woman named Diana Ellis, his first wife. She had died in a car accident nearly 3 decades ago. Dean, Rachel, and Jason were her children. Her blood, not mine, not adopted, not rescued. Robert had taken them and vanished after her death. I'd been told they were orphans. In truth, they were his, always were. That was the day my world cracked, the day I realized I had raised another woman's children under a fabricated truth. And the worst part they never knew. After discovering the truth, I spent weeks in silence. Not rage, not grief, just silence. I would sit at the breakfast table stirring my coffee long after it had gone cold, watching the light shift through the kitchen windows like I was waiting for something to make sense, but it never did. I didn't confront them. I couldn't. How do you tell the people you've raised, loved, sacrificed for that you were never their mother in the way they believed? So I stayed quiet. But then, something started to shift. It was subtle at first, like a door left, slightly ajar. Dean began managing the family trust after Robert died. I thought it was a way for him to look after me. In truth, he was reorganizing assets without my consent. We're streamlining things, he said. Tax, reasons. Rachel, always polished and poised, started pushing the idea that I should move into a senior condo. It's safer, Mom. That old house is too big for you now. When I resisted, she brought realtors to our home without telling me, and Jason, my baby, he became the most brazen of all. He would stop by late at night asking for money, first for his startup, then for his mortgage, then for something urgent. He never explained, always promising to pay it back. One night I overheard him on the phone in the hallway. He thought I was asleep. She still got cash in the savings account. I just need her to sign the damn thing. I'll call you after I get it. I didn't breathe. I had become a wallet, a strategy, a step on the ladder. They weren't my children anymore. They were grown adults raised on entitlement and half-truths, truths I didn't even know I was feeding them. And yet the irony, they still called me Mom, but only when they needed something. There was one final moment that broke me completely. A Sunday brunch, warm scones, fresh flowers, Rachel sipping coffee as if nothing was wrong. She looked at me and said, "You should stop dressing like someone who hasn't accepted her age. You're not in your 40s anymore, Mom." That word again, Mom, used like a name tag, not a title. Like it came with expectations, like I owed them my skin, my savings, my silence. I nodded, smiling politely, but in my mind, something clicked. That night, I opened a blank notebook and wrote 3 names at the top: Dean, Rachel, Jason. Underneath each name, I wrote everything I had done for them, and then on the opposite page I began to list everything they had done to me. By the end of the night I closed the book, and I knew exactly what I needed to do. I wasn't raised to be cruel. I wasn't raised to be vengeful, but I was raised to know the difference between being kind and being used. The night I closed that notebook, I stopped being the woman who waited to be loved back. I became the woman who would take her dignity with her piece by piece, until there was nothing left for them to exploit. The plan wasn't flashy. It wasn't dramatic. It was precise, surgical. I started by calling an estate attorney, one who didn't know Dean, didn't golf with his partners, didn't owe anyone favors. Her name was Laurel Mendez, sharp mind, steel voice, warm eyes. I trusted her instantly. Over the next 6 months, we rewrote every document. The trust revoked, the house transferred to a private LLC now controlled, the savings accounts split across, multiple holdings, some international, some hidden in plain sight. The family, business shares quietly sold. All done, legally, all done quietly. Not one of them noticed. Then I created 3 envelopes, one for each of them, each containing a letter handwritten in blue, ink sealed with a wax stamp, the kind of stamp Robert used to use on thank you notes, the kind they'd recognize and assume meant importance. In the letters, I told them the truth, not just about the money, about me, that I had raised them with every ounce of love I had, thinking I was their mother in every sense that mattered, that they were, never mine by blood, but that I never needed them to be. That love in my eyes was proven through presence, not paperwork, and that I had hoped, desperately hoped they would grow into people who knew how to return that Love without manipulation. I ended each letter the same way. You were my choice every day until the day you chose to stop seeing me as human. Then I set a date. Christmas, not because it was dramatic, but because I wanted them all in the same room. I wanted them to see the truth together. No more triangulating. No more lies. Behind my back. I practiced my speech. I ironed my dress. I cooked every dish as I had for decades because I was never going to stop being who I was. But this time I was leaving the table with my head high, and then I waited, and the day came. They didn't know what was in those envelopes, didn't know the house they laughed in wasn't theirs anymore, didn't know the bank accounts they expected to inherit were already closed. I didn't know that I had found my peace, not in revenge but in release. They thought they were about to erase me. But I had already rewritten the ending. They arrived one by one, just like every other year. Dean pulled up in his silver. Sub barely glanced at the wreath I had. Made by hand, he carried a bottle of wine, nothing wrapped, no note, just a label still wet from the store cooler. Rachel walked in next, heels clicking. Like punctuation marks, she air-kissed my cheek and dropped her designer bag on the hall bench like it was her home, not mine. Jason stumbled in last already, smelling like whiskey and cologne, whispering sweet nothings to his newest wife, Lacey or Casey. I'd already lost track. I smiled and welcomed them like always, poured cider, stirred gravy, laughed at stories I'd heard 1,000 times, but inside I was steady, ready. Dinner went on like a ritual. They devoured everything, commented on how no one cooks like Mom, used that word again, like it meant ownership, then dessert. I cleared the table with care, then came back with the gold envelopes in a wooden tray. What's this? Rachel asked, eyeing the wax seal. Just something I wanted you all to have, I said calmly. A Christmas gift. Jason opened his first. His lips moved as he read, but no sound came out. Rachel frowned, then reread her letter. Her fork slipped from her hand and clinked head against the porcelain plate. Dean didn't finish his. He stood up, slow, deliberate, and stared at me like I had broken an unspoken contract. What the hell is this? He asked, voice low. The truth, I answered. You're just walking away after everything we've done together. No, Dean, I said gently. You walked away the moment you stopped seeing me as a person, the moment I became a title, not a human being. You're punishing us because you couldn't have children, Rachel snapped. That's what this is about. That one hurt, but I let it pass. Jason muttered something under his breath about calling a lawyer. That made me smile, truly smile for the first time in years. You can call whoever you'd like, I said, but you won't find a single document with your names on it anymore. Dean slammed his glass down. You don't get to rewrite history. But I did because I was the one who had lived it. I was the one who kissed their foreheads through fevers, waited in parking lots during football practice, cried at their weddings, not because I had to, because I chose to, and I had the right to choose when to stop. The room filled with silence, not the awkward kind, the final kind. Jason stormed out first. Rachel followed, grabbing her bag like it had betrayed her. Dean stood a minute longer, searching my eyes for softness. He didn't find it. When the door closed, behind him I stood in the center of my living room. Same lights, same tree, but for the first time, no weight on my chest. I didn't cry. I turned on the radio, made myself a cup of tea, and sat by the fire. They thought they were punishing me by removing me from their lives, but I was setting myself free. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for people who don't value you is let them miss you. And sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself is stop showing up for people who only open the door when they need something. The days after Christmas were quiet, too quiet, some might say, but to me it was the kind of quiet that comes after a storm, the kind that lets you hear your own breath again, the kind that feels like peace, not loneliness. For the first time in decades, I didn't have to tiptoe around moods, requests, or expectations. No phone calls asking for loans, no emails about trust funds or properties, no sudden visits that turned into guilt trips, just me and silence. At first, I didn't know what to do with all that space, my calendar once packed with reminders to send birthday gifts. attend school plays, or respond to. Jason's latest urgent business idea was now empty. So I filled it with things that were mine. I joined a local pottery class at the community center. My hands, once used to fold laundry and slice apples, now shaped clay into imperfect bowls that somehow held all the beauty I never gave myself permission to create. I began volunteering at a library downtown, helping elderly folks set up email accounts to connect with their grandchildren, some of whom actually wanted to hear from them. I went to a poetry reading. I danced at a senior swing night. I sat in bookstores for hours without checking the time. I started living, and I wrote letters, dozens of them, to women I had met over the years, old friends, former students, even strangers I'd once spoken to in waiting rooms. I told them my story, not for sympathy, but so they'd know they weren't alone, that it's okay to love deeply and still walk away when love isn't returned. One letter I kept for myself. It wasn't a goodbye, it was a declaration that I would no longer apologize for choosing peace over pretense, that I would no longer measure my worth by how much I gave to people who saw me as a resource, not a person, that from now on I would give only to those who understood what it meant to receive with grace. And then one spring morning, almost a year after that Christmas, I got a letter. It was from Jason. It was short, barely 4 lines. I read your letter again. I didn't understand it then. I think I do now. I'm sorry. No return address, no plea for money, just a simple acknowledgement that maybe, just maybe, the message had landed. I didn't write back, not out of anger, but because I didn't need to anymore. Forgiveness, I had learned, doesn't always mean reconciliation. Sometimes it just means setting the weight down and continuing on lighter. And I was lighter. Now, the story people thought they knew, the story of a woman who raised 3 children not born of her blood, wasn't about betrayal in the end. It was about freedom, about rewriting your life when the old version no longer serves you. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's his. You are allowed to walk away from people who can only see what you provide, not who you are. You are allowed to start over, even at 58, especially at 58, because love should never be a debt. It should be a gift. And I'm finally keeping mine for those who know how to open it with both hands. There's one letter I never sent. I wrote it the week after Jason's note arrived. I folded it 3 times and slipped it into an envelope, but never sealed it. It sat on my nightstand for weeks like a guest, waiting for an invitation to stay. It was addressed to me. Dear Margot, you did your best, and that was more than enough. You loved children who weren't born of you without asking for proof that they'd love you back. You gave your time, your energy, your youth, even your dreams to a family that was never fully honest with you. But even in that dishonesty, you brought light. You raised 3 people with your whole heart. You carried them through school and sickness, heartbreak, and healing. You kept going when it would have been easier to give up. You smiled through tears. You stood up quietly when others tried to push you down. And then one day you chose yourself. You stopped waiting to be seen. You stopped shrinking to fit into a story someone else wrote for you. You stopped proving your worth to people who weren't ready to recognize it. You didn't become cold. You became clear. That is not revenge. That is reclamation. I never mailed that letter because I already knew its truth. But sometimes we have to write these things down just to remind ourselves that surviving isn't the same as living, and that walking away is sometimes the most courageous chapter in our book. So if you're watching this and you've given everything, if you've loved so loudly that it echoed through ungrateful walls, if you've been erased or ignored, used, or overlooked, I want you to hear me when I say you are not invisible. You are not too late, and you are not alone, because sometimes the family we thought we needed is simply the lesson that leads us to the one we deserve. So live not to prove a point, but to write anew.